the losses are okay. And I think the one thing that I'm really bad about is I'm so competitive. And I think people who know me really well totally see that and understand that. But I think the people that I interact with, even somewhat on a daily basis, I don't think most people will see that. They'll probably see a drive and wanting to do well, and I never think I'm going to get outworked, like those types of things that are controllable. But the competitiveness, I hate losing. And I hate losing more than I like winning, and I don't celebrate wins. So I think that the wisdom or the knowledge that I would love to impart is twofold. Losing is okay. Like, you don't always win. That is not going to happen all the time. And how do you respond to those losses is really, really important. And then celebrating the wins, which to this day, I think maybe understanding that I'm not good at it is the first step of trying to be good at it. But I am awful at celebrating wins. It's about the next thing very, very quickly for me. How do I get that? Okay, cool. I got that. What's the next thing?
Right.
And I hope to God I'm fortunate enough to have, kids at some point. And I hope that they are so much better than I am on celebrating the wins. And I want them to be able to handle losses.
Interesting. I'm excited to have you here, man. I feel like there's a professional across the way from a professional here. And I always sit across from somebody that doesn't necessarily make their living talking on camera every day and talking into a microphone every day. And I don't necessarily do that either, Mike, but you do that, man, at the highest level, brother. So I'm sure I'm going to be a student here during this hour and a half session we got, my man. So it's going to be exciting. That being said, so whenever I start these shows off, I always like to get the engines revving. And the way that we do that is sort of allowing you, the guest, to take us on the journey, bring us on that ride to get us to the point to today, and to let us know sort of what's been the evolution of what you've become, who you've become, and the twisting and the turning and all the nooks and the crannies and all maybe the rocks that have got left unturned, or maybe you turned them over a bunch of different times or so forth. But man, let's launch from there and start to fill us in, and then I'll have my party on my side and we'll have a great conversation.
Well, first off, man, it's awesome to be with you, and I appreciate the invite. Secondly, that's a big question. And when you said we were revving up the engines, I thought we were referring to caffeine. I was ready to take a sip of the coffee and let's roll here. But in terms of the evolution, my Lord, man, if I think back to the start of my career, and I don't know how far you want to go back, and we won't start when I sort of popped out of the womb. We'll advance things a little bit, but my entire life in Manny, I think it's sort of interesting because you gave me such a great introduction. I appreciate that. I never knew that this was like a job that I could do. A lot of my friends and my colleagues in the business, they'll tell you, hey, like when they were like yay high, they wanted to be a sportscaster. They knew that this was something that they wanted to do. And that was not my path, man. Like that just didn't happen that way for me. I wanted to be a doctor my entire life. Like growing up as a kid, pediatrician, high school, I sort of had that in mind. And when I got to college and I went to Fordham in New York, I was pre-med. Like I was in the bio classes, in the chem classes. I was getting my butt kicked in chemistry my freshman year. But, this whole idea of being a broadcaster, a sportscaster wasn't something that was on the vision board, so to speak, for me when I was a kid. And I'll never forget, it was my freshman year in college, and I'm in my dorm room, and one of the guys down my hall is dressed in a suit, and he's walking out. And I was like, where are you going? And, at night, where, if you're wearing what's going on here? And he said, look, I'm going to go and cover the Nets game. And I paused. I said, what do you mean you're going to go and cover the Nets game? And he said, oh, I signed up. I'm at the radio station. We have media credentials. I happen to have a car on campus. So not everyone can make their way from the Bronx to New Jersey for the game. So I get to go and cover the Nets. And I was like, oh my God, that sounds really, really cool. And as I alluded to, I was getting my butt kicked in chemistry, and I said, wait a second, this might be a cooler path here. So I ended up signing up at the radio station, and then fast forward, had a bunch of great internships, got to do play-by-play there, got to host radio shows there. And I was really fortunate, Manny. I had some people, and I think a lot of the people that join your podcast or anyone that's listening, you don't start these journeys, and just get handed the keys to the car, so to speak. Like there's a lot of people that are involved. There's some luck, there's execution. And in my case, I needed some people to help me along the way. I needed a lot of people to help me along the way. And people took, for whatever reason, an interest in me, and the advice and the critiques on the work were instrumental in my career. And after I graduated, I was fortunate to get a job at SiriusXM Radio, which was just Sirius at the time. I started doing updates, the overnight update, and slowly worked my way into hosting and got to do the Phil Jackson show, got to work on NBA radio with Kenny Smith for a long period of time, was doing stuff on NFL radio, the All Sports channel. And then fast forward, it was NBA TV to do their fantasy show, because not everyone understood fantasy, at that time, which is still crazy easy to think about. And the only reason why I got that job was because of the Olympics in Torino. And at the time, NBA TV was based in Secaucus, New Jersey. They were using a lot of local anchors in New York to help fill out their shows. But when the Olympics were going, and you know how this rolls, man, like a lot of the local, in the larger markets like New York, they'll send their sports people to wherever the Olympics are. And they had a need. And they said, do you understand fantasy sports? I was like, man, NBA.com, real GM, man. I've been playing since I was in 8th grade. And that's my first opportunity on the TV side, then ESPN, then Pac-12 Network, and now NFL Network. So that's a really long-winded answer, man. And I apologize for rambling there, but that's sort of the all-encompassing the path.
Well, for starters, man, I don't think there can, if you would have continued that all the way for the hour and a half, I still don't think it would have even been a long answer, because what gets covered in that distance that we travel is uniquely yours, man. So I always give credit to the contributor there, that it's never a right or a wrong here on this show, man. It's always about us understanding how that works out. So look, I think a lot about, so I have a couple of people that I know. One of them I interviewed here on the podcast, Ryan Hollins, who's also a TV guy for the Houston Rockets. He was a client of mine a few years back when we were doing celebrity projects. And then way back when in the day, and you mentioned Secaucus, which is funny because I believe, and I could be stood to be corrected here, but Major League Baseball Network, their show is there out of Secaucus, right?
Right down the street from where NBA TV was. In fact, when I actually did an audition there in 2020 when I had lost my gig at Pac-12, which was not fun. I traveled out there during COVID. It was like kind of a crazy situation, but I was getting the flashbacks because as I was driving to their studio, I was like, oh my God, NBA TV was right down the street.
That's amazing, man. Yeah. So Eric Burns was also on this podcast many years ago.
Oh, the best.
Yeah. And that dude is an absolute character. But it made me think about what you guys do. And it leads me to the thought that the person that does what you do, and maybe you can confirm this for me, what kind of level of detail and understanding for the craft? Because I think there's different subsets of skills in what you do too, right? So obviously you got to be great on camera and communicate. Maybe that's not correct. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong there, and I'd love for that to happen too. But the knowledge depth of, and I think of like Orion that knows basketball because he played basketball for a decade. And I think about a guy like Eric who played baseball for his whole life. And then there's you that come out of college and I don't know if you were a sports guy or not, you played it or whatnot. We haven't got there yet, but how do you parlay what's needed from that part of it with being the guy that's talking about the thing that's so important to the fan every day that gives them that experience to make them want to come back and watch you some more in what you do?
Yeah, it's a great question because the discipline and the medium really matter, right? So I, spent most of my career as a studio host, whether that was on the radio side or the TV side. I wasn't necessarily in the trenches consistently on the play-by-play side, and I think that's just a different beast. But as far as the skill set, and I think it's evolved over time, at least for me personally, because when I first started, Manny, it was all about, I got to know everything, every single detail. I mean, you're constantly just trying to absorb as much as you can, whether that's watching every single game at night or just reading everything about these games during the day. Especially when you're young in your career, I think there's, those moments of, hey, I might get checked. Like I got to know everything because I don't want to embarrass myself. Right. So there's, at least for me, I was operating out of fear. It's like, dude, you got to know as much as you can. And then as I got older, I realized I'm never going to know everything, right? Like there's so much. I mean, hell, if I sit in a room, at NFL Network now with guys who played or guys who coach, they have forgot more football than I will ever know. So I think my job now has changed a little bit, where I'm not necessarily doing a radio talk show. Like, my job now is to listen to everything that's around me and make sure that the best stories and the best experiences that are uniquely specific to the people that I'm working with are conveyed to an audience. Like, my job is totally to make everyone else look good. And I love playing point guard from that respect. But I got to the point in my career where I realized I will never know every statistic, and that's okay. It's about what I do know and using that information to, poke the bear, so to speak, with some of the people that I work with, or bring in, other perspectives and other takes. So the prep hasn't changed in the sense of the volume. Like, I can't even tell you just how much I'm trying to take in. But to me, I think I've changed the way that I've prepped. Like, if you quiz me now on, statistical categories, I don't know. Like, maybe I'd get some of them right. I probably get more wrong. Maybe, I don't know. If hopefully I'm shooting a 50% rate or whatever the case may be. I'm not great on trivia stuff. It's just not necessarily like what I do or what I enjoy. What I enjoy is always having some of these conversations with, my analysts, basically making them look good. And then on top of that, trying to entertain and educate a fan, because I just think that there's so much sports media out there that talks down to the fan. And to me, it's about, educating an audience so that they're engaged in what they're watching, when Sunday football comes around, or Thursday night or Monday night football. Like, I want them to know, like, hey, these are the trends. These are the things that I should be looking out for. And I'm using my guys to teach the game.
It's incredible. I think there's some big news that got brought out the other day, and I'm curious on your take on this. And then I'll correlate it to what you do in your room when you're talking football. And now, and the ones you did before, was that all football too? Because I know your NFL Network recently. It was varied sports.
The wild thing. Yeah. It was, it's obviously now all NFL football, but I think to your point, when I was working on the radio side, you literally did everything, right? It was NBA radio, which was obviously specific, but I worked on the all sports channel too. So you kind of needed to know everything. When I got to ESPN, same thing. You're a little bit of a generalist. Like, you got to know, if you're doing Sports Center, your pulse is on everything. You could be doing a soccer highlight, a hockey highlight, an NBA highlight, a football highlight, all within the context of one show. So you gotta be on it a little bit. NBA TV obviously is just the association. NFL, just the league. And then when I was at Pac-12 Network, I was doing basketball, I was doing football mostly, and it was specific to the college game in those 12 universities. But you bounce around a little bit over the course of your career.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when I think about a studio room like First Take, obviously it's a really noisy one, right? With Stephen A. and Molly and Shannon now being a big part of that. Is that basically the same effect that you all are doing when you're in your studio for your room, or is there some sort of subtle differences there? See, and I'm almost asking that from a dummy standpoint, right? Because there's that part where we see it from the audience's standpoint, and then there's the part where you are living it as the people that are doing that every day. So I like to know almost if we had a backstage tour, you know what I mean? Yeah. What would that be like? So is it correlated in the sense it's like a First Take and you've got a Molly and I would just be fascinated to understand how you would break out the different roles and why they do that, and then bring it to your current position and how you guys do it, and sort of how the pieces are moved around on the board, and how it drives this outcome of creating this experience for people.
Yeah, I think it depends on the type of show, right? Like, what they're doing on First Take is finding two opposite sides and let's go. And it's also daily, which creates a different type of exchange. So for example, when I was still working on Total Access, that was somewhat of a daily show, depending on the time of the year. So you got your 1 hour, you have your production meeting, and you're sitting in this room, and it's not just the analysts and whoever's hosting that show that's expected to take part in that dialogue. It's the entire team. Like, your line producer will set up, generally speaking, some topics that he or she thinks is interesting. And then we're just kind of going back and forth. And sometimes, one of the guys who played will just say, hey, like, I like this. This is where I want to go. Or they say something, and I think to myself, my God, I have never heard that before. And I'll make it a point to say, you got to say that on the show. And if you don't, like, I will get you there. But I would, a lot of times just pinpoint different things and bookmark it in my head and say, hey, these are the conversations that I want to have. Now, I haven't, First Take when I was at ESPN was rolling. I at the time, and Skip and was on the show at that time. And I don't know, I didn't work on it, so I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I would imagine it's, hey, I'm spitballing. Here are the 10 biggest topics of the day. Here are the questions. Where do you guys sit? And then try to make the compelling arguments to go against each other. And there's obviously a lot of emotion. Some of those guys get heated when they're on the set, which I think makes it, must-see television for a lot of fans. But I think, once again, that's a different, if I did a pregame show, sort of set up similarly, but if I do a post-game show, man, we're just ripping and running. We're in a room, we're watching the game. I'm taking my notes on the game and asking our researcher questions on some things that are happening. But it's, to me, the most important thing is the conversation. I sit very close, not on top, because we usually have a pretty large room, but a couple seats away from whoever I'm working with. And, whether it's Maurice Jones-Drew, I'll kind of just give him one of those and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or Chase Daniel, hey, what do you think about this? And just keep it in my head. If they say something, I just bookmark it and make sure we get to it.
Yeah, fantastic. Makes me think a lot about when you're podcasting. It's the same thing. You've got certain places you think you want to go, but then something comes up, and then you just filter it and you place it somewhere in your mind where you're like, okay, I got to come back to that one later. Which almost leads me to this thought of how well you have to process information and communicate in what you do, because you're on a big stage every day. And how much, I guess you could say, leeway, Mike, do you guys get from if you make a mistake, or if you say the wrong thing, or if you stumble over your words, or if you do that type of stuff, because obviously the light is shining on you very heavily. Sure. How does that impact your performance? And if you do that type of stuff, is there some sort of consequence in the back end that producer comes out, or I don't know necessarily the hierarchy of these places. So if I say the wrong word, sure, whoever's in charge, do they come in and say, hey man, you really can't communicate right now that well today, so fix it? I mean, what's that like? Because it's like, is there some accountability in there somewhere about how you perform and all that good stuff?
I'm fortunate to say I haven't had one of those conversations where, like, dude, like, you don't have it today. And there's definitely days where I don't have it. And it's, you go home, and that drive home is sometimes a little bit tough, because at least for me, I don't know if I could have a boss harder on me than I am on myself. I remember having this conversation with Steve Lavin. We worked together at ESPN and then Pac-12 Networks for a long period of time. And I say, Coach, how do you know, which guy, like, did you have to alter the coaching delivery and the message based on the player? And he said, absolutely. He said, some dudes, you kind of just need to put your arm around them a little bit, and other guys needed to get after it. I grew with Curtis Conway, and Curtis would tell me this all the time. I remember being on a Pac-12 campus, I won't say who, and I turned to Seaway and I said, man, I don't know if I could play for this dude. And he said, why is that? I go, the way he talks to his guys, like, I would, if I made a mistake, I think about it. Like, I obsess over the mistake. It's not healthy, and it's not a good approach. But I said, if I was doing that and I had this dude MFing me, like, I don't know. And he said, man, I was the type of dude that needed the coach to get on me. And he said, I see what you're saying. So I think, to your point, when I'm doing the job, don't make mistakes, right? Like, that's always first and foremost. I try not to make them as much as possible. And then, obviously, that's going to happen. No one's flawless and no one's perfect. But, over time, you realize the tricks of the trade, right? Like, you think about, hey, is this show going to re-air? What's the language that I'm going to use? I'm not going to say tonight. I might use a day, because if we're doing the show live, but it's on a Monday night, but it's going to re-air on Tuesday, I can't say tonight, because anyone who's watching on Tuesday is already going to know that it already happened. So, that's just a rep thing. Just, what the situation that you're in currently, and then think ahead. But look, early in my career, I know I made mistakes for sure. And then, sometimes you get some critical feedback, and sometimes it was hard, depending on the network that I was at. Probably took it a little too personally. And sometimes that kind of wreaked havoc a little bit on those next few shows. I remember one time, and I give him so much credit randomly, I was just texting with him this morning, which maybe is why I'm thinking about it. But I was at ESPN at the time, and Kevin Connors, who became one of my best friends in the world, and I was having a little bit of a tough time there. And Kev said, man, like, just let it rip, dude. Like, you were good enough to get here. Just do your thing.
Can I
And
jump in
I think
on that?
that advice alone. Yeah,
I want to highlight that real quick. Please hold what you were gonna say, because if I find something that I don't want to let escape, I jump in.
Yeah.
So place mark where you're going with that. But what was tough? Because I want people to understand this part, right? So I was going through a tough time. You said, what is that? So that can relate to somebody else that might be going through something, that can understand, hey, how this was, what I was going through, and then maybe what it was that got you through that point with this guy's help, obviously.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I've been at a lot of networks now, and the size of the networks are all different, right? Like when ESPN's big,
right,
bunch of networks, large volume. I mean, I am so grateful for the time there, because that's the best, hardest situation you will be as a broadcaster, juggling a lot of just the volume alone. And no matter what you do after, like, you got this, like, you can handle it. So definitely super grateful for that. But because of the bigness of the place, you have people who oversee different sports, different shows, and people who have a vision of how they want those particular products to be executed. And guess what? What you might like and what I might like might be very different. So if you're working there and you're working on different shows, you might be getting feedback that is running counter to what someone else in another position is saying. So all of a sudden you're just trying to intake as much as you can. And then you have your coaches, like your broadcast coaches. We had one there, and just unbelievable person, Bud Morgan, who, he's passed away since, but my God, I mean, he would coach me the way I needed to be coached. Little rough at times, but frame by frame. I remember we would sit in a room, and he would, literally on his click his computer, and you would see frame by frame. And I'm thinking to myself, what's this dude talking about? Like, what are we doing here? And it was the hi, hello, the welcome of the show. And he's going frame by frame, and he's telling me about how to engage with my co-anchor, advice, feedback I'd never gotten before. And that was just one example, but you're trying to take it all in. And then I realized, and it's the same thing I tell students now, if they ask for feedback, hey, what I might like is different from 10 other people that you're going to talk to. You're going to get all these different opinions. Take what you like, take what makes sense, make it your own, and then run with it. And I think I was struggling at that time, just trying to take everyone's feedback and combine it, and it wasn't working.
That's a big problem, I think, in modern day in general right now, because there's so much available access to any and all types of information that people are having a difficult time processing what's real, what's not real, right? So what would be something that you could suggest there? Maybe because you're obviously very seasoned in this from all kinds of levels, from an expert position of your job, plus having had great coaches, plus being in very high profile environments. How would you help someone go through that process of what they should focus on, or what they should be clear about in terms of focusing on that key information that they need to, not 10,000 different parts of information that might be irrelevant?
So here's what I'll tell you, Manny. When I was at ESPN, I was 28. I was still in my 20s, man. Like I was one of the, if not the youngest, like one of the youngest. I can name check, I think Anish Shroff and I, who's still there, Anish and I are about the same age, maybe a couple months different. So the point is, like, we were still, I hate to say it, still kids, like, it just kind of is what it is. Like, we were adults, but in the industry, to be at that level, like we were fortunate, man. We were really fortunate. But I do think that the reps over time and those life experiences alter how you absorb some of those things. So at 42 now, as a guy that's, worked at a bunch of different networks, different platforms, different types of mediums, different sorts of technology. I've done everything from regular linear television to the social stuff to virtual reality, which is how we have our common friend, Bobby. Like, like, you do all these different projects, and you have to be adaptable and be willing to receive some of that feedback. But I also think you get to a certain point in your life, and at 28, I was confident enough to get that job. Maybe there was a little bit of imposter syndrome. Probably there was, but even, there definitely was, because at 42, I still have some of that sometimes, depending on the situation. But, at 42 now, like, the feedback, I'm just taking it in differently. Cause I'll be honest with you, like, I get feedback sometimes. I probably shouldn't say this, but you'll get a piece and you go, yeah, that's cool. Like, and in my mind, I'm going, that's not me. Like, I'm not going to roll like that. Like, that's not what I do. Right. Because at the end of the day, at least for this medium, what I do on air is personal. Like, that's me. I'd like to think when you and I are having a conversation, whether there's a mic here or we're just on the phone, Manny, like I'm the same person, whether there's a camera or a mic, and to me, that's a really fundamental part of the actual job.
Sure.
The best people, the ones that I have the most respect for in the business, certainly like you get to a certain level, you can execute, right? Like you can execute at a high level doing these shows, but why do I gravitate towards you? And to me, there's always this affability that you have to have. And I say to myself, I want to do the shows that I work on as if you're watching at home and we're in our living room and we say, hey, I'd love to have a beer with that dude. Like we're just hanging out. And to me, those are the types of shows that I like as a consumer. And those are the ones that I try to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is there, and again, feel free to answer this at your own will, but have you seen instances where there's people that are next to you or on set with you that don't employ those authentic values in that sense, and they're divided in who they show up as on TV versus who they are? Because golly, I know that I've been in business environments and I know that I've been having, especially with social media, right? It's like, this guy looks like he's all warm and fuzzy on social media, but then you meet him in person, you spend some time around him, you're like, fuck, this person's all over the place, man. Like this is a shit show. And that is completely inaccurate with what that representation is on social media versus who they are in person. Yeah. And by the way, I think that's fantastic that you bring that up, because it's such a quest, Mike, to be able to align yourself that way, where what you see yourself matches with what somebody else is seeing with yourself, and then even another part of you that's being matched with yourself, right? So I think it's a fascinating point you bring up, but I'm curious if that was, a known thing out there in your world.
Yeah. Look, I think there's some people who understand when the light goes red and it's go time. A little different, and once again, like there's nothing wrong with that. Like I think generally speaking in my life, like I have to ramp it up for our shows because I'm usually like this. Like I'm kind of a chill person in general. Like, it's just kind of my vibe, but I also realize I can't be boring on television. So, maybe an exaggerated form of myself might be the best way of describing it, but it's still within my comfort area. But as far as the other personalities, like I always, man, I just try to be like a normal dude, with people that I work with, and how do you have some of those bonds and those relationships? And what's really fascinating is, and it was one of the cool things when I was working on Total Access, we had our show unit, right? So it's the same people, generally speaking, that I'm working with every single day. When I was at Pac-12 Network, same people every single day, every single season, this was our crew. So you get to develop relationships, friendships, understand people, know about them personally, and actually give a damn about how they are. And to me, that's how the shows get better. I always said, like, one of the coolest parts, and it's a bummer because TA got canceled, but one of the coolest parts of that show was, the show meetings was cool. Doing the shows, of course that was fun. Like that's why we do this. But if I go down in the green room and I'm hanging out with Michael Robinson, just sort of hearing about his life, or just, what it was like for him traveling, doing college football in the NFL, just Chase, I always felt David Carr. I mean, I should name check everyone, but like the point is, like the show, I don't want to leave anyone out. Baldy. The point is, like, you sit there and you get to know these guys, and I think they realize, hey, like you actually care, right? And it's not just about doing a good show. And of course that is, but I think when you get to understand people personally, it does make the shows better because it's how you feel when you're doing them. And I'm a big feel guy. So that's to me maybe the most paramount thing. And I try to align myself, I think, with people who think that way. Absolutely. Or we just gravitate and we find each other. Maybe that's the way it works.
I think you said it perfectly, man. I speaking of gravitational pulls, the understanding of you saying you are a mellow, cool, chill guy. Similarly, I'm the same way, but it's like if I've got to expand my energy for some role or speaking engagement or something like this, and I got to elevate it, it's like you don't change who you are. You're just expanding that capacity with that energetic bubble you got inside you, right? You're like just giving a little bit more oomph there, trying to get it over the hill, man. So I can follow you there. And again, I'm curious if this is at all connected, but is there a way, are you able to talk about why Total Access got canceled at all, or is that too far of a stretch?
Oh yeah, no, it's all good. I mean, it's out there. I mean, there's just a ton of reports. Like it's just,
and there's somewhere I'm going with that in addition to, because I want to ask a follow-up question on that.
Because it's not specific to our network. I mean, it's everywhere. Like the business is consolidating and there's budgets, and the business side of it makes it a little bit difficult. And it was just really just a business decision
Sure.
for the company. And I think it was tough. Look, not only tough for the people that work on the show, and more importantly, and I would say most importantly, there was obviously some layoffs and we lost some of our teammates, and that's absolutely friggin' brutal. I mean, it's gut wrenching, to be honest with you, because I've been through it. I think a lot of people who are probably listening to this podcast, they've been through it, and you don't want to see that happen to the people that you care about. So that obviously sucks in the worst way possible. And sometimes, and you just kind of hope. Like, the one thing that I'm really fortunate with is when I did lose my gig, like, I ended up in a better situation, and I hope and wish that for those people as well. But it's a budget situation, man. And that's kind of where we net out at.
Yeah, makes sense. I appreciate that. And I wasn't trying to trap you there by any means. I wanted to go there because I wanted to get, I think you answered it for me. I was going to say, so people shift and people have to adjust and people get laid off and people lose something and they realize that the former isn't going to be the future type of a thing. Right. So sure. What happens is, and maybe you just answered it, but maybe you have something else, but the processing that and dealing with it in a way where you think, hey man, got my head up, looking to the next thing, we're going to be all good. So that plus you said you were fortunate enough to get what seems like now an even better thing. So was that a result of you doing great work? Was that a result of you having the great relationships with somebody? Because I think, again, I always translate this to people that are somewhere in their life with what they're experiencing, because what you're doing is just a different industry category and different type of job that you're doing than somebody else that's over at the Strip right here working at a hotel that's a director that just got laid off because the business is cutting back, but they knew John Smith over at the other hotel. And it's like, so just triangulating for everybody so that, we humanize a lot of this stuff, man.
Yeah. It's completely the same exact thing. I mean, most of my friends that I don't work with, that I grew up with or went to college with, are obviously, some of them are broadcasters because we had a good program at Fordham. But the point is, a lot of my friends don't work in the business, and it's the same. These are the same stories, but just a different type of company, right? It's not media. It's, like you said, the hotel, or, it's a Fortune 500 company, or it's something in finance, whatever the case may be. They're all the same situations, just labeled a little bit differently. But there is a fear factor, man. The funny thing is, Manny, when I get to talk to students, I always tell them how fortunate. Like, I don't legitimately think you'll meet a luckier broadcaster than me because of the places that I've been able to work, the opportunities that I've been given, and just the people who have taken an interest. And for what? Like, I don't even know what I did to warrant the help that I've gotten from a lot of folks. It's wild to me, and that's why I'm really fortunate. But when you spend a long period of time, and it's really weird because the places that I worked at, NBA TV at that point when Turner, it's kind of wild, right? Because we're talking, I don't know when this podcast is going to air, but obviously a lot of conversation about Turner losing NBA rights, right? So like, that's the thing that's out there. But when they got the rights, NBA TV went from Secaucus, New Jersey down to Turner. So the league used to run the network. And then when they did that rights agreement, TNT, Turner, they took over and they ran NBA TV. So when I lost that gig, I was right on the precipice though of getting to ESPN, and I was a kid, man. I was in my early 20s at that point. It's like, oh, okay, cool. There'll be another gig. And it didn't hurt. It sucked, but it didn't hurt like that. ESPN, I got to leave on my terms. And then Pac-12 Network, I definitely did not leave on my terms, but it's almost a decade at one network.
Wow.
And because it wasn't big and you got to do everything, and we were on the campuses and you got to do all the big shows, in a lot of ways that became, my identity. So that became really hard, the way that it ended and the timing of it, because not only do you think you're getting a contract extension and then they go, peace out. It's also COVID because it's 2020 and you don't know, there's no live sports. You don't know when things are going to get back in. You're freaking out. And I'm sitting there going, I might be done. This might be the run. And we got to pivot and figure something else out. And like I said, I was fortunate to land at NFL Network, but even that becomes relationships. The guy who was hiring at the time, I knew from ESPN, but it was just a hi, hello. I hadn't worked on his shows before. And my agent had said, hey, just so you know, they called some people that did work with you there. So this goes back to just relationships and how do you leave places? And I didn't leave. I mean, I'm lucky. I don't I haven't left on bad terms anywhere. I don't think, at least. So, to me, it's just sort of, how do those relationships impact what's to come? And I think, to your initial question, Manny, I think that doesn't matter what industry. How people feel when they're around you might be the most important part of anyone's professional and personal experiences.
Yeah. Well said, man. Look, obviously I was never in question of how good you are, but you are, I hope people are paying attention to this. If you're not, pay attention to what I'm about to say. Mike is a demonstration of how to communicate at the highest level, plus also make sure it ties back to the question that I originally asked and not let the question go unanswered. It's fantastic how you do that. I've watched it every single time you've done it on this podcast so far. And I'm like, damn, that was really good, Ben. So it's evident that you're one of the best there. So has there, when you start off, you're younger, you're kind of just finding and fishing through the stuff and, maybe swimming a little bit upstream, and there's some headwinds in that, or some downstream effects of that going in the opposite flow. But now that you're more of a seasoned guy, do you have a seat or a place that is more aspirational to you in this journey now? Because broadcasting, again, I don't know, like the hierarchical adjustments in terms of going north in this world, where maybe you look at it like you've made it in that sense, like you were on Total Access, NFL Network. Okay, great. Or is there that, I remember when I was a kid, man, we used to watch Sports Center all the time. It was Stuart Scott. It was Cohn, Linda Cohn.
Linda's the best. Yeah.
Godly, who else was doing some great stuff back then in those days? Oh, was it Steve Levy? Did you?
Steve was there when I I was there. Yeah. For sure, there was Steve. I mean, there was probably, if that's sort of the era. I mean,
I believe so.
Patrick was probably there. I mean, there was, I mean, and maybe even a little bit more new school with Scott Van Pelt, who, by the way, is like, even when I watch SVP now, like, people got to realize this too. He is legitimately a sports fan. Like, I remember being in our cafeteria, and he just wanted to talk sports. So I actually, when I see his success, I love it, man. Just because he's a sports dude at heart, which is cool to see.
Yeah. I think Rich Eisen was another one. I think he was another one back in the day. So I mean, and again, I could be way off, but are those seats that someone like you wants to eventually sit in, or is there the Stephen A. comparison on First Take seat something that someone like you wants to get to, or does it become a TV gig of some sorts? Like, where are you going with all this stuff?
Can we combine a couple things? Can I combine Stephen A.'s current contract or the one that he's going to get? I'll just take those dollars. Stephen A. is obviously a unique talent, man. Like, that's not my thing. I have a ton of respect for executing like that and doing that specific type of content. I'll be honest with you, Manny, like, I really do, if I was a basketball player, I'm more Stockton, you know what I mean? Like, I don't really, I mean, hell, not to compare myself to a Hall of Famer. I don't mean to do that. I'm just saying, like, I don't care if I'm shooting. Like, I get more satisfaction from making sure, like, when we finish, hey, was this a clean block? Did we tease the stuff that we wanted to tease? Did it sound entertaining? Was it conversational? And most importantly, did I make sure that the guys I'm working with look good? Right. And in those roles, I just want to host. I just want to host shows. And when I was an intern, in one of my internships was at WNBC, and Fran Charles was there. And Fran, amazing person. And I remember him saying this. I had to do a paper. It was probably like my junior year or senior year. And I said, Frank, can I interview you for this paper? And he's like, oh, of course. I go down to 30 Rock and I sit with him and he answers all my questions. And look, I graduated in 2003. So this paper was probably, 02, 03. I mean, that's like over 20 years ago at this time. And I still remember these words from 20 years ago. He said, Mike, it is not about the places that you do the work. It's about the work that you do. And as a young college kid, the goal was ESPN. How do I get there? How do I do SportsCenter? Those types of things. And I remember when I got to ESPN, there were people that were leaving. And I said to one of the anchors who had been there for a long time, I said, man, like, what's going on here? Like, are you kidding me? This is a dream. Like, I don't want to leave. And he said, I'll just give it a couple years. And I was like, what? And fast forward, then there's just changes. And I still think back to this day, those words that Fran had given me. And I had to circle back on that when I was at Pac-12 because I love the work that I was doing, but there was distribution issues, how many people were watching, like you hear a lot of that outside noise, but I was like, man, I'm having a good time and the shows are fun. I'm super proud of a lot of the stuff that we did. And I always felt like, man, if we maybe got a little bit more exposure, maybe more people would have realized the type of quality on the shows and the people that I was getting to work with. But it was sort of fascinating to see how it's all played out. But, to your point, it's those types of moments and those experiences, I think, made it possible for every other stage. So when I think about the things that I want to do, of course, there's 1 or 2 gigs. Oh my God, if they ever opened up, I would love just an opportunity just to compete, just give me an audition. Can I get an interview? Can I get in the door? If I don't get it, I don't get it. Right. I just, can I get a swing? Right. I just need the at bat. Yeah. And then if I don't get it, it's on me, but just get me in the door. So there's a couple of those gigs and those roles and those opportunities.
What would they be? No hold out on us, man. You got to tell us what they would actually be. Let's cast it out there, Mr. Yam. Let's get this thing going.
Look, at the end of the day, to me, what I love the most is the conversations before the games and then after the games. So to do some of the high level pregame stuff and halftime and postgame stuff would be an absolute dream.
And that could be for anyone, Amazon, that could be for ESPN, CBS, that type of stuff, right? Where you've got those Fox still, right? Obviously,
there's
pregame shows.
Damn, Manny, the way the rights are going across the board, it seems like every streamer and every network has got a slice of some sort of pie that's out there. But, and look, I've been fortunate too, just because, I've gotten to do some of that stuff at NFL Network as well. And, I'm kind of keeping the fingers crossed. There'll be some of those opportunities that will pop up. But at the end of the day, man, it's just about, hey, how do I have a good time on the shows? How do I make sure that everyone that's working on the show also is having a good time?
Yeah, no, I think that attitude is what makes you great, and what actually I think people want to go to the highest level thing and get that top job, and they want to sacrifice what it takes in the middle to get there, and all the little focus points, the little milestones that have to be hit, the prep that goes into there, the competitiveness, the skill development, and then because they don't do any of that and they just want that big job, they never actually get to be the best at what they do. Therefore, they forego that opportunity at the top. Very interesting. Sure. So you said something a few minutes ago that kind of struck me. I just want to bring it back. So you said something, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but about Steven being like a once-in-a-lifetime talent or something like that. Is that I believe that he is that type of once-in-a-lifetime talent. And maybe you see it as well differently in sports and in broadcasting and TV where he's an anomaly, right? I mean, that's going to be a guy that just comes in. I think Shannon Sharp is also the same way. I mean, those two guys, it's like they're just built differently, right? But then there's the guy like you that comes in and just works every day. He's charming. He's got this spirit to him. He can get after it, and he's got that scrappiness to him, right? He just wants to win. Is the lion's share of this business or this industry more about finding, is there only a couple key talents out there like the Stephen A's that are this rare air and this uniqueness, and then it's blended with a couple of the guys like you? Or how does that dynamic work? And then I got some more on that after you answer this one.
Yeah, no, I'm laughing because I feel like I've had this conversation off air with a lot of my friends who are more in line with what I do, which is on the hosting side, because the getting's good, man, for those personalities at the top, like those Stephen A's, who, by the way, I mean, look, people will watch the shows and the pre-games and the studio stuff. Like, I don't think people understand the amount of preparation involved, the hours. And by the way, I'm not saying that, look, the job is hard, but at the end of the day, like, we are still just, we're talking sports, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, I think a lot, it's just sort of the economics around it. Sometimes it's a little bit hard. Like, I think about how my parents have worked, right? And like what they do. And a lot of my friends and their parents. I mean, can you imagine like a salary that's like $1 million a year? If you would have said that to someone, are you nuts? Like, that is wild. And that's awesome. And by the way, that's what the market dictates. So, man, get yours. Like, I'm all about that. Like, you get as much as you can because it's going somewhere. So it might as well be into your account, right? So like, kudos to him, and I hope he gets everything that he deserves. But as far as the landscape in particular, like, I think the top, like, Pat obviously gets, a ton of credit, but Pat's been able to, McAfee, he's been able to aggregate just on a massive, I mean, think about that rise, right? Like, you go from doing shows, building a studio, understanding, hey, I'm going to start as a podcast, then we're going to go video. And then from video, we're going to get these opportunities, whether it's FanDuel or ESPN. I mean, that is truly a remarkable rise. And I give him a lot of credit because those are not easy things to go and build. And he's been able to do that. And I think that's probably lost on a lot of consumers, the difficulty of being able to execute. But
so I want to hold that again there without cutting you off, even though I'm cutting you off. I want to understand why that's hard to do. So you can either go there now and say why that's so hard to do versus continue your thought there.
Sure. So the only thing, and just to continue on the other point, so from a hosting perspective, there's a lot of hosts in the business, and because it's so subjective and because the people who are hiring, like, what's the metric? How do you show that person A can execute better than person B? Like sometimes it's just hard. It's like, hey, do you have the wiggle? Does someone like you? Is that affability factor that I'm talking about? Is that in that game? And do you want this person to be sort of the face of this particular franchise on a specific network? And I think those are the questions that network executives need to ask. What's the demographic? Hey, are we looking male, female, ethnicity? All of those types of things are taken into consideration. But I think to your point on and your question on the difficulty of basically building a brand. Think about, Manny, I'd ask you this, right? Like, you are grinding doing a podcast. How many people have podcasts? How do you separate? How do you cut through? And like, if I go to YouTube right now, I can't even tell you the amount of times I watch videos, by the way, going to sleep. I never thought I'd be that guy, but I'm sitting there watching about Porsche 911s and cool watches and why. I mean, it's just wild to me. I'm like becoming my dad, which not in a million years did I ever think I would have become, and would have told you you're crazy if you would have said I would have gone down that path. But the point is, you sit there and there's all these channels, all these people that are doing content. And yet, what do I say? What do I do? How do I deliver? So an audience is going to follow me, that they're going to hit that subscribe button, that they're going to consistently watch the programs that I'm doing. I just think the difficulty of it, people have platforms and still can't do it. Sure. And to me, it's how you cut through, and that's the difficulty of it. That's that hard part.
Got it. Cutting through. I think there probably is some luck, like legitimate luck in that part.
Sure.
I look at people that are in this podcasting space, and I'm pretty objective, and you probably have an opinion on this too, Mike. I realized that there were certain times to get in the game where the game was more ripe, that if you just stayed in the game at the right time and you played the game consistently. Like when I got into podcasting, it was 2016. There were some guys that were in it for like 3 or 4 years before me, and they stayed in it from the moment that I had learned about them, and they did it consistently the whole time. And then I picked my head up here in 2024, and they've got tens of millions of people following them. I'm like, oh shit, that's where I messed up. I just didn't do it like they did. And at that wave, they caught that wave at the right time. Now, are there other factors there? Sure. Would it happen the same way today at that scale with all the new people creating? Probably not. But could you make it? Could you make it? Yeah, I'm sure you can make it if you stay at it for another 5, 10, 15 years, right? Are you willing to play that game type of thing? So, I think timing has a lot to do with it. I think market entry and the simplicity of being able to jump in, those types of things matter a lot. Fascinating point of view, man. Fascinating point of view. So, obviously, I'm a part of what I heard you were interested in too. I'm going to change gears a little bit here and take us off sports for just a few minutes. But you also wrote a book, a kid's book.
Yeah.
So I want to hear this transition and how this whole thing came to life. Is that it right there behind you, by the way?
Right there.
Yeah.
I would be the worst weatherman ever. I had to once you said book, I'm like, hold on, I know it's over one of my shoulders. Yeah. Which way do I go?
I totally get you, man. Totally get you. I think I've done that a few times here. I'm like, what about this right here? And I'm pointing at this damn thing behind me. It's just a drape there. I'm like, oh, it's over here actually. Right. But yeah, man. So how did a children's book come to life, and what is that about?
Okay, so the name of the book is Fried Rice and Marinara, and there's a lot. I'd say Genesis. There's multiple moments as to how this happened and really the why behind it. So I'm Chinese and Italian. My dad was born in Hong Kong, came over here when he was young, 16, didn't speak any English. And like it was sort of a difficult path. And in fact, it was sort of wild to me in 2020. So like 2019, 2020. So before COVID. I was watching, whatever news channels I was watching, and it was heartbreaking because I was seeing these stories about people coming to the US and kids being separated from their parents. And it was a hard pill to swallow, man. Like, I'm sitting there watching and going, this is like soul crushing. Like, how do you separate a kid from his parent over what?
Right.
Like, what just transpired to make this okay? And I thought to myself, my God, like, we're better than this. Like, we don't need to do this. So I had wrote actually an op-ed at that time, just kind of talking about my family's path, because I was like, well, damn, like, not all immigrants are bad, right? And in fact, I think most of us, a lot of our family members, like, they weren't born here, right? Like, they saw this as opportunity. They were, unfortunately, maybe just happened to be born in situations that were not ideal, and people need to scrap and claw and try to make a better life for them and their families. So so I wrote that op-ed, and then so I say that as sort of like a foundation piece. And my cousin, a couple of my cousins, they had asked, like, hey, do you know a book that I could get, that's mixed race, like anything, for some of my nieces and nephews? And I thought to myself, no, I don't. And I was helping out this company called Vooks through a buddy of mine who I worked with at Pac-12, Lamar Hurd, who is now the analyst for the Blazers. So Lamar went to Oregon State, knew the CEO. We got in touch. I started helping them out. Ronnie Lott, Samantha Peshek, they did books for the platform. And I said to Joey Jenkins at the time, who was their CEO or still is their CEO, I said, hey, I'm looking at the library. I don't see a ton for like mixed race kids and really Asian kids. And I started thinking about my childhood and the books that I used to read. And like, I never had a character that looked like, it just didn't exist. Like, there weren't Asian characters. There was certainly anything about mixed race kids. So I said, hey, I have this idea. If I sent you a manuscript, would you take a look? It's like 100%. Send it over there. And they loved it. And then that team, they are amazing. They're the Vooks platform. It's streaming videos, so they're animated stories, read along text with full narration, which really helps kids learn how to read. So he said, hey, we'd love to do this book. So they did the book, and it did well on their platform. He said, hey, any interest in making this a physical book? I said, are you kidding me? Yeah, man, of course there is. So that's how we got down this path. And then the more research that I did, Manny, the more disheartening it was to see the lack of representation. I was fortunate enough, actually, a couple of weeks ago, and I haven't gotten the video yet, but I was able to do a TED Talk on the importance of diversity in children's literature. And you go through the numbers and you think to yourself, okay, cool. Even the stories that are available for pick the community, the limiting narratives around those stories it's kind of appalling. And to me, I just wanted, basically the story is about Mikey, who's Italian and Chinese, who doesn't know for his fourth birthday, should I have Italian food or Chinese food? And he's getting pulled in two different directions. I wanted to have a theme that was relatable, no matter what your ethnicity was. Everyone loves your birthday. Like, when you were a kid, who doesn't love their birthday? So I wanted to use that as the backdrop and just have a normal, regular story. With a character who was Chinese and Italian, which didn't exist. So to me, that is a long-winded answer, but that's kind of the reason why I decided to write that book.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. The narrative that you reference in this whole thing is one of them not having options in terms of including other diversified points of views / narratives that you mentioned. Relates to what? What do you mean by that?
Okay, so if I go to Barnes and Noble, and I did before Fried Rice Marinara came out, and it's Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This is like a year ago. There's a rack of books. I don't have the numbers. I could go through my phone because I remember taking notes on it going, this is like ridiculous. Roughly speaking, there was 34 books on the rack. I think of the 34, let's call it 28 to 30 of them were specifically about physical appearance, smelly foods, whatever, right? And 20 of them were written by 2 people or 3 people.
Wow.
So I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, that doesn't seem right to me. First of all, 34 books showcased in the month of May for Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. That's all we got. That doesn't seem good. Of those 34 books, we're talking about 20 of them written by 2 people, and of the 34, roughly 30 on those themes. No, like, that's not cool. And by the way, I'm just speaking from an Asian American perspective, right? Like, I got to imagine if I'm in the African American community and I go and look, some of those themes probably be the same, right? Or we're talking about and I'm not saying historical figures are not important. Of course, that needs to be out there. But yeah, there's the book about, Martin Luther King and all that. And that's great. But what about the story about the kid's 4th birthday, right? Like, we're better than this in terms of storytelling. There's great storytellers that are out there. We need to widen that gap. And I can't help but think, when I tell you I wanted to be a pediatrician and I didn't know sportscasting was an actual job, when I was a kid, I wasn't exposed to, I watched games, right? Like, I played all the sports as a kid. I watched countless hours of games, but I never saw an Asian dude be a broadcaster. My freshman year in college, I get cable TV for the first time. I look up on ESPN and I see Michael Kim. And I said, oh my God, like I never saw an Asian guy do sports before. And by the way, I grew up I had local news, New York City, #1 market. I saw Asian broadcasters, but they were on the news side. I never saw anyone do sports, right? And most of the Asian newscasters that I saw were female, by the way. There was only one that I remember that was male, T.Y. Chang, who was at NBC. And I remember interning when he was there. But the point is, like, you're not exposed to it. Like, it never clicked in my head. And then when I saw Kimmer, I say Kimmer, we're friends now, and I got to do shows with him. But when I saw Michael on ESPN, it like planted a seed. And that's kind of one of the catalysts to go down this path. So to me, the importance of some of those narratives to expose kids, and once again, it doesn't have to be an Asian thing. I'm just talking across the board, any ethnicity, any, sort of culture, to understand, like, you're not just this one aspect or this two. It's not just smelly foods. It's not about slanting the eyes, right? Like, there's other things that make up a culture. And to me, if we can expand that storytelling, you really can foster, feelings of understanding, like, hey, there are real achievable paths that I didn't consider before.
Totally. And then, speaking of sports, I mean, you had, again, it might not be maybe it's the most recent reference, but maybe not the first, but wasn't it the Jeremy Lin guy that played basketball? That was like Jeremy the first Lin Asian guy.
Oh my God. Jeremy was, someone asked me this a couple of weeks ago. I said, what's the best sporting moment of your life? And look, you're talking to a dude who's a sportscaster who has been to, I can't even tell you the amount of I've covered World Series, Rose Bowl game. I mean, just across the whole thing, NBA finals, like the whole thing. And I tell everyone, and it ain't close, Jeremy Lin Sanity rolling is the coolest thing that I have ever seen in my life from a sports perspective. And here's why. My dad, who is not a sports fan at the time, and I'm working at ESPN, he would watch the shows that I would do, but like he didn't care about sports. Yeah. He was calling me to ask me, yo, did you see what Jeremy Lin did? First of all, he never said, yo. That's definitely something that I would say. He'd be like, Michael, did you see this Jeremy Lin guy? But my family members who weren't sports people, captivated by it. And to me, that effect, to see an Asian guy who spoke great English, Ivy League educated, go out there and ball out. Are you kidding me? That was still to this day the coolest thing. There was I was fortunate, there's a documentary HBO on this, and I was fortunate the crew came, the writers, producers, directors that came to NFL Network. I got to moderate the panel, and just to hear about those experiences and watch it. I mean, it was just to relive those moments, man. It was awesome. Sorry, that's like a real tangent, but yes, Jeremy Lin, spot on, nailed it. Awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think you can see what the effects are of that cultural diversity taking an impact on a mainstream sport that, again, you can argue it all day you want, but it's predominantly Black African Americans, right? That male African Americans that run that sport. And so to see an Asian American, was he American too, or was he just?
Oh yeah, California kid.
Okay, yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, no, that's
which, by the way, is another important part of it, because right, like when Yao Ming was playing, like Yao wasn't from the States, right? So like there is like this subtle difference for the community. Like I'm Chinese, and yes, I am Italian. I'm an Asian American though, right? Like I'm not from China, right? Like my dad is born there, but I was born in the Bronx. You know what I'm saying? So like I'm an American. So I sit here and so I'm able to gravitate and attach myself to a guy who talks like we do, right? Like there's like that subtle difference in that connection and that touch point that was really meaningful, that I think the Asian American community didn't totally have with Yao Ming. And that was awesome. And of course I was a Yao fan and used to put him on my fantasy teams and the whole thing. But there was a difference there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. How many kids you got?
None right now. So,
none? You're still none?
Yeah, we're still.
I thought I heard Bobby say you had kids, man. Jesus.
No.
Oh, is it on?
It's probably because Bobby knows that I want kids, so that's probably the direction. Yes. But so, when it happens, here's
is that part of the plan?
We have bedtime. We got bedtime stories. Let's go.
Let me ask you this:
Let's go. No, I would absolutely love that.
Okay,
I would love that. Yeah.
Let me forecast a thought for you because I'm very curious about how that would happen. You have kids. You become a father.
How that would happen, Manny, if you I don't know if I'm the person to give you the birds and the bees story, but if you need the lesson on how that happens, maybe after the podcast, I could talk you through it.
Hey, there's books out there on that too, my friend, if you know what I mean.
Good call.
Hopefully not children's books, though, if you know what I mean.
No, I'm with you there.
But who knows nowadays? Who knows nowadays? If you had to take your experience now in being around sports, where I believe it's a culture of competition, it's a culture of winning, it's going after the championship at the highest levels, right? It's fighting, it's perseverance, it's all of these words that you get, certainly that I learned even in playing sports back in the day, that help shape you on your journey to some extent. Is it everything? No, but being in those rooms with those professionals that played at the highest level, having conversations next to people that are doing your job at the highest level and as hosts. Now you're a father and you have to start imparting these lessons and these experiences and these mindsets and these philosophies into your kids. Sure. What do you take into them and how are you starting those based on what you've lived and how you've experienced life this far?
Man, that is a big question. And I don't want to be disrespectful to all the parents that actually have to do this. Like I'm talking from like a theoretical standpoint, because I haven't had to worry about changing diapers and not sleeping and the whole thing. Although the amount of caffeine that I drink on a regular basis, you'd be like, oh, dude, you got like 10 kids because you're not sleeping. But, here, I think the one thing that stands out to me, and I haven't given that question a ton of thought. So off the top of the dome, Manny, it's the losses are okay. And I think the one thing that I'm really bad about is I'm so competitive. And I think people who know me really well totally see that and understand that. But I think the people that I interact with, even somewhat on a daily basis, I don't think most people will see that. They'll probably see a drive and wanting to do well. And I never think I'm going to get outworked, like those types of things that are controllable. But the competitiveness, I hate losing. And I hate losing more than I like winning. And I don't celebrate wins. So I think that the wisdom or the knowledge that I would love to impart is twofold. Losing is okay. You don't always win. That is not going to happen all the time. And how do you respond to those losses is really, really important. And then celebrating the wins, which to this day, I think maybe understanding that I'm not good at it is the first step of trying to be good at it. But I am awful at celebrating wins. It's about the next thing very, very quickly for me. How do I get that? Okay, cool. I got that. What's the next thing?
Right.
And I hope to God I'm fortunate enough to have, kids at some point. And I hope that they are so much better than I am on celebrating the wins. And I want them to be able to handle losses.
Interesting. So you would take personal responsibility and say that because you don't celebrate the win, though you would still advise even a younger child that if you're a parent or not, or just in general. But by the way, part of my sourcing of that question was because I know you have a lot of touching experience with people that play at the high levels as well as you. And so those conversations that you all have or those things you see or those mentorship moments that, you're privy to. And when you said earlier how fortunate you were, there's probably no other guy that understands that as well as I do, because that's how it's been for me with my journey and the mentors that have come in my life and that have basically unloaded everything into me to help me get to where I am. it's been and I think the same thing. How this is amazing, right? How fortunate I am. But I also know what it's like to be in those special meetings with them where they don't actually tell you what's going on and what they're, publicly going through and all these other different things. So I knew that you would have an element of just added wisdom from that vantage point, just not even just for the kids, but it was more for just the listeners to be able to see what it is you'd come up with. But you think that it's fair to celebrate the wins even though you don't? You think there's some validity to that?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the last, I couldn't even, honestly, I don't even know the wins that I celebrate. Like I'd have to actually it is such a concerted effort on my part if something good happens to A, acknowledge it, and then B, just like I said, there's probably a better word than celebrate, but just enjoy it. Totally. I don't enjoy the wins as much as I should. But I think there's been enough moments that happen that are sort of losses, right? Where I can reflect on some of the wins and just say, damn, like I wish, like we were, who was it? God, I got a text, last night from my producer who worked on Total Access with me. And it was just and it was to me and Kimmy Checks, and we both hosted the show the last, 9-10 months. And it was like, hey, I miss you guys. And our desk got moved and the whole thing. And, used to sit next to each other, and, those, like, I miss that. I was in the office the other day for Fordham was doing an alumni event, and they had asked if they could use NFL Network. So I hooked them up and we did the event there. And I remember, I had been off, like Total Access got canceled. And then, basically I did a couple weeks off, basically, just sort of prepping, getting ready for the season. And I go down there, I show up to work, sweatpants and a t-shirt. I was like, oh, my suit's there. I'll just change when I get there. So I change and I'm looking around and I'm thinking to myself, my God, it's like almost like putting on a uniform. Like I miss doing the shows. Like, my God, I miss it. And in that moment, I think that's probably acknowledgement of celebrating the wins, of being able to just still be in the building, still know that I'm doing a ton of shows, have an idea of what my schedule is going to look like when the season starts, know that it's going to be as busy as hell, and be happy about that. But I think I needed some of the losses sometimes to feel that. Like my first day in studio at NFL Network, I started remote. I was doing updates. I used to put like this computer, well, it was a work computer, but I put it on top of my wine fridge, right? I would do hits. I'd have like a, top up, you'd see the suit and the tie. I was wearing shorts and sandals, right? I would do the update, and fast forward like a year and a half later, they asked me to move down to do some more studio stuff. And I remember just feeling so much gratitude being in our newsroom, brand new facility. It's generally empty because you're still dealing on the back end of COVID, and just going, oh my God. And that was me, sort of doing basic jobs. Like I was at a network. One of the questions they asked me when I was interviewing at NFL was, are you going to be okay just doing updates? Like you literally did every show at Pac-12 Network. Like this is not, we don't have that here right now. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. So I felt like I was starting back, essentially like bottom up. Like, how do I rise? How do I get those opportunities? How do I make sure that, I'm going to do the best job that I can and just say yes. And that was tough. Like that, like I still don't think I'm totally over what happened at Pac-12 Network. For the most part I am, but like there's still a little bit of anger. There's still a little bit of like, no, I got this, man. Like I will show you guys. And I think in this iteration over the last couple of years, to be at NFL Network, to be on some of the shows that I've been on, I'm like, no, like I got some tread on those tires. Like the thoughts that I had because you guys let me go that I might be done. No, I'm not done. So like there's like those types of things that I think set myself up to, those losses set myself up for trying to stack some more wins. But I do need to be better at celebrating those.
Sure.
Maybe I'll have a glass of wine when this podcast is over. I'm looking at my wine glasses over here.
That's the trigger point for you to celebrate something after this. No, but I get it, man. I mean, people are wired differently, kind of like, we touched on a lot earlier. It's just people are built in terms of how they want the coaching, right? Sure. Do you want the hard guy that comes in and tell you to F off and you're lazy, you POS and get going, and that guy's like, yeah, and then the other guy goes and crawls in his corner. Same thing for somebody like you that's competitive. Somebody might just be like, awesome, it's just moving me to the next level, and there's like this small little pinch of satisfaction that you get from knowing you accomplished it, but you don't need to go out and have a party around it, right? It's just something that you're glorified in, and it's the body of work that you're creating. So, man, I want to make sure that you get some time in between your next thing here. So Lastly,
that glass of wine.
Yeah. Hey, if you decide to do that,
which I won't be doing. I will not be doing that after this because of work thing coming up. But yes,
no doubt about it. But I did want to give you credit on something that you just said too, which was a testament to your character, which is obvious. I'm meeting you for the first time. We've had a couple of previous conversations. We've texted a lot in the last month and a half.
Yeah.
But Bobby has said the world about you, so obviously there's that bridge there. But what you just said, I think, is something important that everybody needs to understand, which is, you went to NFL and you kind of had to do the bottom of the rung, one would say, right? So it's like you leave something where you're high and then you go to a next place which you can get higher, but you start off low and you got to re-rise up through the ranks. And I think that's something that people don't really understand very much. It's like, depending on what your governor is allowing and how far you want to push yourself to go accomplish something, when you graduate, you're always going to end up at a bottom percent of a next new higher level that you want to get to, and you've got to go through that again, which it's so good that you said that, because I think that's the essence of the overall development on the journey of life, which, you're always climbing from the bottom, and that's a good thing if you're constantly changing your elevation. So you can start off on 1,000-foot mountain, and then you get to the top of the 1,000-foot mountain, then you go back down to the bottom of the mountain, and then you're looking at a 3,000-foot mountain. You're like, shit, I got to start up this 3,000-foot mountain again. Let's go, right?
Yeah.
So anyway,
that
man.
willingness is not the easy. Like, to your point, like when I had lost my gig, Ted Robinson, who is one of the legendary play-by-play guys in the country, right? He's done legitimately every big thing that you can think of. And Ted worked with us at Pac-12 Network. We were fortunate to have him. And Ted gave me a buzz. I got so many good pep talks, man, from people.
We're going to do a podcast just for that right there. We're going to hold the next one where we do just pep talk edition.
Pep talk. Oh my God. It was unbelievable. And stuff that I didn't even know I needed to hear that I heard, which was great. But Ted, he had called, he said, hey man, there's going to be another opportunity for you, and that, but just know it might not be a step up. It might be a side step. It might be a step straight back or a diagonal one. But he said, just know, you just grind it out and things will be okay. And I was not the person. I was going to say yes to pretty much any opportunity because I wanted to work. And to cover the NFL, you got to be kidding me. I would have done whatever role that they were going to ask me to do. And just kind of believed in my ability. I said, hey, if I get an opportunity, and it'll come, I might have to wait a year, 2 years, 3 years, but at some point I'll get an opportunity to host a damn show. It'll just happen. And sure enough, it did. And it's how do you react to those moments? Can you execute? I didn't throw up on set, the first day they had me do an actual show. I did it. Right. And, I would say for anyone who's not a broadcaster listening to this, we all go through these peaks and these valleys, and things are not always going to line up perfectly. It's never going to be a straight line up, which sucks because in theory we'd all love that. But it's how do you respond to some of those moments? And Manny, I know in your life you've done a ton of that. Just getting to know you a little bit off of this podcast, it's those responses are really what's going to be your legacy, but B, how people are going to associate. Hey, that moment sucked, and God, I can point to those moments and still think about those feelings. But I had a great support system, people who cared about me, people who were willing to help me along the way. And at the end of the day, man, I had to respond to a little bit, and called every person. I had a whiteboard with every name of every person that I had ever worked with, and just spent weeks reaching out to people, hoping there would be an opportunity. So, I was fortunate to say there was. That's
amazing, man. No, brother. I'm extremely happy we were able to do this, man.
This is awesome, dude.
I'm going to get your feedback after the fact, because I'm a seeker of feedback and of evolution myself. So you're professional, man. I want to know how I did in your eyes. We talk about that later, man.
Oh, you're good, man.
Yeah. And in order to get you off to your next place, man, if you want to share where people can find you, listen to you, watch you, do all that cool stuff, and then I'll ask you my last question, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Social media at Mike_Yam on X and IG, and NFL Network.
There it is.
That's the full-time gig, man. So, and then Fried Rice Marinara, Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
There you go. That's right. Go get you some. Go get now. I'm hungry, man. Now I want some fried rice and marinara of some sort.
Yes.
Dang it. It works, man. It works. All right, brother. Before I part ways with you for today, man, what does always on the grow mean to you?
Oh God, it's never done is the first thing that I can think about.
Man, that's so
because
good.
for as much as I knew that I thought I knew everything a long time ago. I didn't know anything. And I think about the experiences that I've been having right now over the last couple of years and the ups and downs, really just impacting my life and then shaping a lot of the decisions that I make. I think I still net out at one thing. If you just do your best, that's all you can ask for. And some days it's going to look better than other days, but it's never stopping. The personal growth, getting information, it's trying to impact others in a really meaningful way. To me, I think that's like the one thing I'm trying to be conscious of. Like, how do I just elevate some of the people that I'm interacting with? Like, to me, that's really important. But growth, always on the grow, is perfect because it never stops.
Man, I might have just got a couple new taglines out of that answer right there, Mr. Yeah, my man. Hey, brother, keep doing your thing, man. Seriously.
Absolutely.
God bless.
I appreciate you, man.
Let's keep rocking, brother. And I can't wait to meet you in person, my man.
Yeah. No, anytime I can help you out, man. This is a real treat for me. I appreciate you making the time and even offering the invite. So thank you.
Are you kidding, man? I feel like I'm the special one here because I got you on my show, man. Don't you be saying that back to me, brother. But anyway, hey, kick some ass today, man. Have a great day at work, and we'll be in touch here shortly, brother.
Appreciate you.
All right, man.